Welcome to Identity Center Live. I am Jeff, and that is Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey Jeff, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. It's Friday. Kind of excited about that.
Yeah, looking forward to the weekend. I mean, weekend is kind of officially here when the day ends on Friday.
The weekend is what you make of it, right? Maybe your weekend is not Saturday, Sunday. I remember my old restaurant days, it would be more like Monday, Tuesday, or maybe Sunday, Monday, something like that.
I always find the weekend in between the NFL championship round and the Super Bowl to be extremely boring.
Yes, very boring. I actually turned on the skills challenge last night for the NFL. It was terrible.
Yeah, it's like who wants to watch that?
Yeah, it was like they were trying to make like this. So they had like a receiving competition where they were trying to do like basically the equivalent of a slam dunk contest. So like creative ways to catch the ball.
Right.
Kind of fell flat for me. As the great Randy would say, that's a no for me, dog.
Yes, it's just I for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
who do you have winning?
I kind of want to see Cincinnati win it. I mean, I'm a Niners fan. Disappointed that they couldn't figure out how to pull that one out, but they were kind of playing on borrowed money, or house money at this point. So
Yeah,
I'll pull for Cincy.
yeah. I used to be a fan of Cincy way back in the day. I thought a Cincy versus 49ers Super Bowl would have been pretty classic, but I mean, there's so many good characters kind of on all the teams that kind of made it to that point. And Joe Burrow, I'm kind of a fan of him. I mean, I really was impressed by him at LSU, and wow, for him to come in and essentially what was his rookie year play the way he did, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, 2 year turnaround. So there's hope for teams out there, I guess, if they can draft well. So um, yeah, so I'll say it. Go Bengals. I guess I don't really care at the end of the day, but I would like to see the underdog win. I don't think people tuned in to hear us talk about the NFL, but if you are watching and listening, I see we have a couple people in the audience. Feel free to comment as we're kind of going along who you've got yours your favorite. But yeah, this is our weekly kind of usually a weekly live stream. We skipped last week, but we're now back this week just due to scheduling and things like that. So kind of an add-on to the podcast that we do, Identity at the Center, gives us a chance to kind of be a little more current with things that are happening and hopefully have some more interaction with folks who are watching live or even watching on the replay, stuff like that. And I kind of tease this on our Twitter as to what we're going to talk about, Jim, because this is from a conversation that you and I had earlier this week with one of our clients, kind of talking about how to handle passwords, which I know is everyone's favorite topic. Do you
Yeah.
want to kind of tease, kind of maybe a little bit? Obviously, we're not going to name names, but um, how did this come up?
All right. So the way this came up was we were talking about this new NIST guideline, which set forth new recommendations for how to manage passwords, right? And they talk about the importance of length over complexity, which is a pretty fundamental shift over the way we traditionally thought about password strength. Um, we thought complexity was kind of the major driver in um, the strength of a password. I mean, I don't know if that's ever been written down anywhere or if that's just kind of a firmly held, widely held belief. Um, but that was one of the big keys. So anyway, they came out with all these new guidelines, and one of the other big ones is um, the recommendation to uh, enforce password changes less frequently. So typically, the recommendation was change your password every 30 days, 60 days, 90 days at the most. And now the new recommendation is saying once a year or never. And the idea being that asking people to change their password leverages the human psychology element, which is that people will go for something that's easy for them to remember, or they'll just do something that will increment the password very simply to stay within the policy, but to make it easier for them. And so then the conversation shifted to, well, should we take that recommendation wholesale and make that our policy or design our policy strictly around this NIST guideline, or use our own common logic plus leveraging NIST to come up with something that maybe is unique for our organization. And so ultimately, I ended up on the side of I want to follow the NIST recommendation very strictly, whereas you felt like, it's an input into what we should consider for our own organization's policy.
Yes, that's a pretty good summary. I think let me bring it up on the screen here because I think the part that we're going to talk about is specifically NIST 863B, and that is memorized secret verifiers, passwords. Right? Let's put it into English for people. So, the guidance historically, like you mentioned, has been changing passwords, having complex passwords, of varying lengths, etc. The guidance changed, I think, even a few years ago, that changing the password really should only be done if there has been detection of a compromise. So you can kind of see a whole shall nots. I highlighted the part here that I'm thinking about right now is, should not impose other composition rules, mixtures of different character types, or consecutive repeated characters, all the stuff that I think that you would see like in the early 2000s, maybe early 2010s, where it was like, here's the password strength meter, which is a good idea, but it'd be like, you're trying to put your password in and it would be like, oh, you can't use that character more than twice. Or, the old, you're typing in, it's like, what do you mean I can't use password? And then you type the password, it's like, what do you mean my new password is the same as my old password? If I was good, I couldn't log in, right? All that stuff. But this arbitrary change, I think, is the one that is still out there. Oh, we change our passwords every 90 days, every 120 days, whatever it may be. And the guidance, it's changed, as of, I guess, said a couple of years ago, is that it should only change if there is evidence of compromise of that password. So then the question becomes, in my mind, okay, how do you define compromise of the password? How do you even detect that that's taken place? Can you even determine if someone is maybe using a compromised password from a personal account? Because, of course, they're human and they're using it now on their corporate account. So you would need to have some sort of technology somewhere to match up your passwords against some sort of compromise list, right? Whatever that looks like. And there are services out there that provide that. So this is kind of where that comes from. And I don't know if there's a lot of companies that are using that verification process to say, hey, has this password been used elsewhere? Has it been part of a breach? Unless they're relatively far along in their authentication journey. That's kind of where I'm thinking where it falls right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can verify if it's been compromised, but you can't be sure that it hasn't been compromised. So, in other words, there's databases like Have I Been Owned or Have I Been Pawned. .com, where you can go and verify if an account has shown up on the dark web for sale, for example. So there's kind of the positive enforcement of, yes, it has been compromised. There's no way you would know if it's been compromised and it hasn't ended up on one of those forums yet. So I think that's a very good point. But I think, here's kind of my point of view coming into this.
Well, hold on a second before you get to that. The have I been pwned thing is great, right? But at this point, how much value does that provide? Because my email is on that list, and it's been on that list, it feels like, for the last 5 years, because someone somewhere got hacked and it was part of the breach. So now I get all these relatively useless things from Capital One and Wells Fargo and all these other banking institutions say, hey, your email was part of a breach. Here's what you should do. What am I going to do? Go change my email address? That's not going to happen. I mean, for most people, right? You've got too many things tied to it. So how do you even fix that?
No, I think that how you use the database is the key, because I think you're maybe pointing to services that only are looking at the email, but the Have I Been Pawned does have email and password combinations, so you can see if specifically that password's been tied to that email. Like I mean, if you actually go out to the website, you can dig further.
Yeah,
So
now you're just harvesting credentials, though. Has this password been used? Oh, now it has.
Yeah, but you'd have to know it going in. But sure, yeah, I mean, it's a verification tool for anybody, including the hacker, I guess. But Here was my going in point on this whole debate that we had is that the NIST, the people who put together this NIST guideline are deep thinkers and spent a lot of time thinking about passwords and took a lot of the evidence and what was available out there to come up with this guideline. Now, if I am an individual working for an organization, an IAM program manager or a CISO, and I've got tons of things to worry about, including passwords. Passwords is just one of the things that I have to worry about. I don't think I can outthink NIST. I don't think I can come up with a better solution. I might need to make organization specific compromises, but I have to realize that those are probably compromises. My feeling is if I'm in that position, I'd rather be able to say we follow the NIST guidelines. They are the industry standard for what makes a good password policy. And if our passwords still became the source of why a cybersecurity incident took place, at least I can point to that. If I go and build my own password policy and it doesn't follow NIST, or I compromise from NIST because I thought it was a better idea for whatever reason to maybe weaken it, or if it could be seen as weakening it, then look, then it certainly sets me up as being the responsible party for making a decision that ultimately ended up in a major cybersecurity incident, which could have very negative impacts on the company.
So I'm not going to go out and say, and here's my spin on this, is I'm not going to say I'm smarter than NIST when it comes to this type of stuff, right? It's a huge think tank. They do a lot of great work. There is value on it. Where I am smarter is what's actually going to work for my organization. How are we actually going to roll this out in the real world? And I think this is where, certainly we would take, if I'm building up an IAM program or an IAM policy, I would start with this as a base and would say, okay, here's aspirational. Can we actually get there? So am I smarter than this? No. Am I smarter than this when it comes to my org? Absolutely. That's my feeling on it. And I feel like this is a little bit kind of like Jedi and Sith. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. So it's like either take it, and I feel more of the gray Jedi type, kind of the middle of the road, where it's like, okay, these are all good ideas. Yes, let's adopt as many of these as we can. And the ones that we can't do it right now, let's figure out how do we make this usable for people in the real world, and how do we have our policy line up with what is actually achievable. And I think this is a stage thing. Like, it's like, okay, well, when people were rolling out MFA 20 years ago or 40 years ago when this first started, that was a shift in mentality, right? Now it's MFA is everywhere. Everyone's using it to log in their phone, whatever it may be. It's become easier to use, easier to adopt. There's less technical hurdles, right? Things like that. And it's well communicated. If I just dropped a NIST straight password policy on an organization, and then auditor came along and then said, hey, are you doing all of these things? I would be pretty concerned that I'm not even, meeting my own policy, which would put me in a bad position as, oh, now I got to write a management response. It's going to bubble up to committees, whatever it may be. What I'm not saying, though, is sacrifice security. What I'm saying is just balance it with what's actually achievable in the real world. Of course, MFA should be out there. Of course, I would feel comfortable not changing or not changing the passwords, right? Or have it changed in this arbitrary thing. Like, how do we come up with a way to make sure that is working and that we're still secure, right? How do we detect that passwords are being appropriately managed, like that sort of thing? So I guess okay, not really much of a debate, right? Because I think we're both saying, like, yes, it's a good policy. Where we diverge is how strictly do you follow the policy that NIST has put out there? Because it's a guideline. It's not a policy. It's here's the guideline for digital identity. I think people need to take it and then adapt it for whatever it makes use for their organization. I think that's where we're diverging a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think baseline, my assumption in you saying that you're an expert in your organization and you would be the expert on when to diverge from this guideline. I think the assumption that I have to make there is that what you're saying is when to put in a policy that supports a weaker standard, right? Because the NIST guideline says it must be this or stronger. So I say that I'm thinking there's certain
Yeah.
elements of it do.
8
I
characters
guess
in length, 6 if you're providing to somebody. I mean, they're guidelines, right? I mean, it is what it is.
yeah, their guidelines. I mean, I hope you're not making the case that it should be. Well, I should know where 4 is going to be sufficient. But I think if they're saying you don't need to do password resets, and you feel like for your organization password resets are good, I still don't agree with it. But I could see that you feel that doing password resets makes it stronger. But the counter argument is it actually makes it weaker.
No, what I say, I don't think arbitrary. I think arbitrary password resets are not helpful. I do agree on that one. So this guidance that should where is it here? So verifiers should not require memorized secrets to be changed arbitrarily, e.g., periodically, right? That old adage of, hey, it's 90 days, time to change your password, right? Okay, well, that just means increment the number on my password and, hey, I'm safe again, whatever that looks like, right? I agree with that. Like, that is old school thinking. The assumption there is, though, that there are other things that are helping back end that from the security side of things. I do have MFA, or I do have capability to detect password breaches and that are being reused, or compromised passwords that are being reused in my environment. And while I'm on that, Arturo brings up a good comment that is worth noting. Is like, yeah, some of these vendors do have this capability in their cloud authentication to like look for those passwords.
Right.
Totally makes sense. Of course, they're going to charge you a fee for it, right? Because nothing is free. So I'm glad Arturo brought that up because I forgot to mention it earlier. That's definitely a good point. The other thing that Arturo brings up, which is another great comment, Arturo is definitely the man here, is this challenge of is the organization up to date? And I think that's where the application of, is this realistic? Can we actually put this in place? If I was starting from zero, for sure, right? I mean, this is the goal. This is what we're going to start doing. Authentication is, let's follow this standard. Let's follow 5112 for passwords. Better yet, let's not even use passwords at all. Let's go to something else, right? But if I'm not there, and I have to consider legacy applications, RACF mainframe, for example, I can only use an 8-character password, no more, no less. Can't use these certain characters, right? It's always a pain in the butt to try and get those legacy systems to fall into the password process. Are you going to remove a mainframe from the environment? Probably not without any great deal. We've been hearing the mainframe is dead for, 40 years now? And yet they're still out there.
As long as we have an IT.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where I think the application of, okay, what's actually going to work for us? And I think one of the things that you and I have done is, hey, let's talk about the password policy. Why drag down the rest of the organization because of one system or two systems that, for whatever reason, technically cannot support a more modern password approach? Okay.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there, which is that users are, in most organizations, having to juggle multiple passwords, which makes the password reset even more difficult. I think the guideline around what the guideline's pointing out is length is more important than complexity from the standpoint of what are the likely scenarios that people crack passwords, and one of those is they get a hold of the database of passwords, and then they can use modern processing power to attempt to hammer it from a dictionary or from randomly going through a series of possible passwords. And so it goes from you can test every possible 8-character password against that database in like 15 hours with modern computer processing.
Yeah, super trivial to crack.
If you make it 20 characters, is something like 3 trillion years.
Unless it's something that's already been used elsewhere. I think that's where passphrases come in too, right? So it's a combination of like length, uniqueness. If you have like this range of like, okay, well, we know summer 2022 or winter 2022 or whatever it might be, right? There's going to be patterns that are out there. Yep. There's already databases, rainbow tables that you can find these passwords in, and it's super trivial to crack. So I totally get that. I think that's where the guidance goes, is have longer but less complex password is an option, because theoretically you can string together 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different words, whatever the max length is that you can kind of use. And it might be easier for people to remember, I like the 49ers football team. That's a pretty strong password. And is it better than, summer 2022 or my dog's name and whatever year or arbitrary I had to change it? Probably, yeah, right? It's going to be harder to collect all those unique strings. So if you make it personal to the user, it makes it easier for them too. That's where the passphrase things comes in.
So now I just logged into your bank account. I like the 49ers football team.
Good luck if you think that that's a password that I use.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess, this is again kind of where I guess we're diverging, right? It's okay, how do we take this NIST guideline and make it work in the real world? I guess your position, Jim, is sum up your position. How about that?
My position is we as practitioners rely on these frameworks and these guidelines for the right way to do things. And they become the industry best practice. They become the guideline for, they set the bar. If you diverge from that, you set yourself up as potentially making a bad decision for the business. And if a cyber security incident takes place and it's traced back to something to do with passwords, you may be pointed to as the reason because you didn't follow the guideline. You diverged from the guideline because you felt like you knew better and you were wrong. Potentially maybe you weren't even wrong, but it can create the appearance of you being wrong. And to go one step further, I think if you truly believe you know better and you can make a case for doing better, go ahead and do better. But if if you think that, then you should probably join NIST or be a part of the writing of the next guideline.
Maybe they can't afford me. How about that? So I agree with just about everything you said, with the twist of, again, how do you make this work in the real world? That's really the only difference for me, is trying to put this in place. Yes, this is where we want to be. This is where we should be going. We should be striving for that. But you've got budgets, you've got change, you've got people, and those are all very powerful forces that can restrict or impede the ability to adopt this wholesale. I think R2 again hit the best. I'm going to throw it back up here on the screen, because how up to date is the organization with being able to actually get this work in the real world? I think as stepping stones, you and I, the work we do, we see kind of the worst of the worst typically, just by the nature of the strategy work we do. How often would we go in and be able to say, hey, you can go in and you can start with all this stuff and adopt it day one? I don't think it's realistic sometimes for orgs. And I think that's really kind of the turning point for me, is, okay, we know we're going to have to massage this right through the org. Of course, we want to have all the best security features, bells and whistles, but budget's not there. The risk or tolerance for change, whether it's an internal user or even customers, right, is always there. So how do you balance that approach? And I think if you can demonstrate to whoever is approving this policy that you're creating, right, or this adoption strategy, is helping them understand where you're going in the future, because this is the current end state. It'll change in the future, I'm sure, as we go into the metaverse, right? There'll be different ways to authenticate or identify things like that. But I think as long as you're showing, the logic behind here's the math behind the answer, and why in the process that we're going to get to the end state of where we want to be, it may be a multi-year journey, for example, to get there. We saw in the last couple of years, people didn't have MFA. And all of a sudden there was a huge rush on MFA, at the very beginning of kind of COVID lockdowns and things like that. People had to catch up, and now they've got there. So, did they spend all their money that they would have had for security over the next 2 or 3 years trying to get MFA and proper identity things in place? They might have, and there might not be budget or appetite to further invest to do things like compromised password detection, things like that would help you do less password changes, for example. So that's really where I'm coming from.
I think the job of information security leadership is to present back to the business, these are the risks, these are the costs, potential impacts of those risks, and the cost to mitigate those risks. And then it's the business's job to determine how much to invest in mitigating those risks. You want the risk lever to go down, impact and likelihood, then you spend more money. You spend more money, you could go out of business. So it's not like I'm ignorant to that fact, but I think information security's information security's role is not to just say it'll be okay. Let's just
Yeah, definitely
just
not.
give me the budget. And I'll make it okay with whatever budget you give me. Even if you give me unlimited budget,
You couldn't spend
doesn't.
it fast enough to do anything.
Even if you could spend it fast enough to do anything, you wouldn't be able to eliminate all risks unless you pull
Right.
the plug. And that's, I mean, the federal government has no constraints on how much they can spend on it, right? But they can't eliminate all the risks.
Well, I think you're onto something here. Maybe we should pull the plug and go back to, paper, invisible ink on like parchments that you can only see, right, with like a candlelight, something like that. Maybe we go more old school here and adopt some spycraft from the early 1800s or 1900s.
Show my background because
Let me show
I'm
your
actually
background.
considering going the other direction.
You're going the other direction.
I'm
You're
gonna,
going all the way.
I'm gonna move into the metaverse. I'm just gonna put virtual reality goggles on. I'm just gonna live here, and I'm gonna call Uber, and they're just gonna Uber Eats, and they'll just bring food to me, and we'll be fine.
Yeah, and then you get one of those little characters over your shoulder, violating your personal space and doing all kinds of things that you probably don't want them to be doing.
Have annoyances in the metaverse too. Wow, that's not good.
Yeah. This is like not the new thing, but this is where the world is going, is virtual reality. I think you and I were talking about this earlier today, of kind of meta, right? And what does that mean? If you haven't seen the movie Ready Player One, it's a decent movie. I won't say it's the best thing in the world, but I think that's kind of like where a lot of people are thinking we end up, is kind of like this basically virtual world that people would rather be in, and you can kind of be anything, do anything. And that's why people play video games, right? Myself included. But it's more immersive and more realistic, than what we can see today from a visual fidelity standpoint, or even just from like a movement standpoint. So I have VR, and it's cool. I love the concept of it, the idea of it, but it'll be interesting to see how this metaverse thing plays out. And I'm curious to see what it means from an authentication standpoint of there's going to have to be some shared thing behind the scenes that links your real world identity, right, with your meta identity. I don't know, whatever we're going to call it at some point. I'd be curious how those things take place.
You and I are people who have now taken our ability to have an income, and all we do is we have conversations over the computer all day.
Yep.
Our parents and our grandparents never could have visualized that taking place, probably. And so I was reading an article that was very skeptical of the metaverse, and I think it's a balance, right? I think that there's one is I could very easily see, especially as the virtual reality goggles and the interfaces get, more comfortable. You can see kids in their car seat.
Yeah.
In the metaverse,
Yeah, they're no longer watching the little
be
flip
quiet.
down.
I'm just going to put this little thing over your head, and you're going to be in the metaverse for a few hours, and I'm going to get some peace and quiet. Because parents did that with iPads and things like that. And so then kids start from a very early age. It's not even virtual reality anymore. It actually is reality. But the balancing factor to all that is, like, we still need a place to live. We still need to interact with each other at a real level to procreate. And we also have, potential security issues where, our country could be invaded or something like that. So we can't completely dive into some virtual reality and live there and expect that, nothing else matters.
Right.
So we got to figure out. I don't even know if we have to figure out. It's just these things kind of evolve, and so I'm not as skeptical about it as I probably was of how impactful the internet would be.
Well, I think the technology is very cool, for sure. Like it's there. I've used it over the last couple of years. I've seen it kind of grow and expand. And if you're looking for more movies about like metaverse, right? Obviously, The Matrix is the first one that jumps on my mind. Is like everyone is plugged into a metaverse. They're batteries for the robots. Sorry to spoil it after 20 years, the plot of it. But humans have become batteries, for the robots who have basically won the war in the real world. But the only way to keep the humans happy is to plug them into the metaverse or the Matrix, and people go about their lives, and ignorance is bliss, as one of the characters will say. You're seeing now, like I saw this recently, where farmers were putting VR on their cows, and we're getting more milk to be produced, right, as part of like the dairy operation. It strikes me as funny to see a bunch of cows wearing VR stuff, but hey, I guess if the results prove itself out, maybe it makes sense. And there's lots of good and bad that come along with it. So it's like any other tool. I think there's another movie I'll recommend if you haven't seen it. It's called Strange Days. Also came out like 15, 20 years ago. And the whole concept is you can basically you can record what your brain sees and experiences, and then play that back as like a clip later or something like that. So, obviously that could be used for good or bad things, but another option there.
I have a question for you, Jeff. Have you ever bought a virtual outfit for your
like one of those
for your like avatar to wear?
No, I am not a microtransaction cosmetics kind of person for sure. That is not my jam.
I didn't even know that was a category, but I do know my kids have both bought outfits for their Fortnite characters, which I think is kind of like a metaverse.
Yeah.
And just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it's not something that people are willing to spend money on.
Oh, it's
I would
powerful.
never spend money on that.
No, but that's not your priority, right? I mean, I think if I'm going to spend money in a game, it's most likely going to be for an expansion pack for new content or a subscription fee because it gives me some benefits or something like bigger bag space. Or I'm thinking like World of Warcraft.
The game
Elder
becomes
Scrolls.
more fun.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's not that big of an extension to, if people start saying, well, this is who I am. I am this avatar in this metaverse.
Yeah.
I want to look good.
It's your identity.
I want people to look at me and think like, whoa, that person's actually really cool.
Well, it's cool to look at.
The human psychology behind it.
If you got like a cool looking character, like that's one thing. But one of the jokes in the gaming industry is like, at one point, I don't remember which company it was selling horse armor as like a cosmetic, where you could like make your horse look differently. And it was like, I don't remember how much it was, but it was like $1 or $5. People were like, okay, you can buy armor for your horse, like in a video game. Like that was kind of like the meme at the time. Like this sounds ridiculous. But as we move further and further along into this mix of real and VR world, right? I guess people have their different priorities. Yeah. All right, we how long have we been talking? We've been talking
a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. The metaverse. 34 minutes. We should probably start to wrap it up. But do we want to talk about the White House memo about zero trust just real quickly?
Yeah. Before we move on from the 800-63, I just want to mention we had Archit Lohokare from CyberArk on the audio podcast this week. So that episode is live now. Go out to Identity at the Center on your favorite podcast app and download that episode. And that guy is really sharp and knows a lot about this level of assurance framework that is kind of the basis for 800-63.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation. And we kind of, got right into some of the weeds of authentication and assurance levels and things like that. So yeah, Archit was a lot of fun to talk to. And yeah, check that out. That came out this week. When did we publish that? That was, I guess, January 31st, our last episode of January 2022. So can check that out. Let's talk real briefly about the memo for heads of executive departments and agencies, aka
Did you get the memo?
Did you get the memo? Right. Zero trust. So, officially, right, here is the direction that the federal government is looking to establish from a zero trust architecture standpoint. It's a long memo. I am not going to read this. We'll definitely have a link to this as well as the NIST 863B in the show notes once we finish kind of broadcasting here. But It's a pretty good read because a lot of times I see zero trust information that is very conceptual. It's like, okay, here are the ideas. And this is kind of how it starts off with. But once you start getting down into some of the body around identity, devices, networks, applications, data, they do actually start to become a little more prescriptive, or at least a little more detailed guidance as far as what should you be doing in these areas. Like, what is the minimum baseline of how you do authentication, or things like even DNS over a secure channel like HTTPS or whatever it may be, or DNSSEC, like those sorts of things. So I think it's worth a read for folks who are keep hearing about zero trust and trying to figure out, okay, what does this actually mean in the real world? What should you be doing? What are some of the core concepts? And gives you some idea around, do you have some of these things in place? Maybe you already have multi-factor. Great. Are you doing it for continuous authentication checks? Does your platform support that sort of thing? I think these are the sorts of things I think people would get some value out of. What do you think, Jim?
I think it's great that I'll call it a private sector concept. Zero trust is being adopted, in really not only adopted but being taken to kind of that next level and institutionalized within the U.S. federal government. I kind of feel like when I read what this document is all about, it's kind of a plan to have a plan, and I think that's when you're trying to have the elephant dance, if you will, like the really mammoth organization. That's kind of what you need is plan to have a plan. You need frameworks, things like that. It's hard to just come right out with a plan for something that's that big. Another thing that we're seeing happening is like when we were talking about last IDAC Live, which was around the ID.me, the authentication technology for, kind of identity verification for
the IRS was looking to adopt it.
For the IRS.
And they're starting to get some blowback on that too, by the way.
Are they?
Yeah. I think people were concerned because originally, sorry, I don't want to hijack it, but ID.me was found. So they were saying they were only doing local checks of identity data, and it turns out that somewhere along the line that was not correct, and they were comparing liveness checks against some sort of federal database or centralized database for identity fraud, things like that. So, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on exactly what the issues were, but that's kind of where the controversy has started to come up.
Well, I think the federal government is a target for supply chain attacks. The SolarWinds may have very well been just a focus on getting into the federal government and some of the big corporations. But I think that the more the federal government relies on third parties, the more they open themselves up to those kind of possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to go off and build stuff like this if there's a commercial product that is secure. That's why things like FedRAMP exist, right? There's a whole set of tools that are certified for use in a federal, or at least in a U.S. federal government, that kind of gives the seal of approval. It's like, yes, security has vetted it. It's okay. Use it appropriately, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess I don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about, some of the problems that they are. It looks like my camera decided to stop.
It sure did.
All right, well,
Frozen Jimmy's back. It's been a while since we've seen Frozen Jimmy.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do about that.
Fading into the metaverse. I like how you're using the game industry cocktail hour as your metaverse background.
Hey, it's a fancy place.
He's back.
I'm back. Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what the federal government's doing to, in terms of cybersecurity. However, it's a humongous problem to tackle because of the complexity and it being such a high focus target.
Yeah, if I was looking for job security, I would be in information security in in a government. I probably wouldn't be paid very much, but I would know that I would have a unlimited amount of targets to go after to try and fix from a security perspective.
Right.
So kudos to
Right.
those who are in the government and are trying to help keep us safe despite whatever headwinds they might be facing. How about that? Is that a political neutral friendly enough?
I think so.
Okay,
I
good.
think giving props to those folks is right on. There was one other thing that we could talk about in the 863 guidance, which was kind of quote unquote the SMS controversy and whether or not that's a proper form of multi-factor authentication. Because there's at one point NIST came out and said don't use SMS as your multi-factor because of the ability to do SIM swapping attacks and things like that, and they've kind of backed off on that, right, and said that it is an acceptable form of multi-factor, and so I kind of think that's just something to be aware of. It's SMS as a multi-factor is ubiquitous, but I think this is one of those areas too where it's like when that original guidance came out to not use SMS, everybody picked up on it, wanted to move away from SMS, right? And now NIST is backing away from it because relative to other forms, is not that insecure. We thought, push authentication was such a better option than SMS, and I think the data is showing otherwise. And so, how I feel is that, look, this is one more area where do you really know better than this, folks, in terms of which is the right way to go? Now, you could make the criticism, well, they changed their mind a couple of times, sure,
Or sometimes
but
they move too slow. Yeah.
or sometimes they move too slow. But I guess that this show's about putting the information out there for people to formulate their own opinions. We're not here to put opinions in people's head or tell people what to do. It's to present, here's different ways of looking at it, and ultimately for folks to kind of pick that direction for themselves.
To some degree, I think they should do what we tell them to do. But I think the SMS is an example I use all the time of it was considered cutting edge a few years ago, not even that long ago. Guidance has changed a little bit on it. It's kind of gone back and forth. Is it still better than having no second factor at all? Absolutely, despite the risk associated with it. If you're using just a password alone and you have no other factor, that's not good enough, man. You got to do more. You got to do better. If that second factor, the easiest thing to get in place is SMS, so be it. Let it, that's better than you are today. So, is it the best? No, right? There's certainly stronger options, but don't let what you're saying. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, or something like that.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of better.
I was not even close, but thank you.
Yeah, pretty close. You had the spirit of it.
I had the spirit of it. All right. I think that's probably a good spot where we can end it. Kind of went a little bit all over the place today, but hopefully people kind of took our conversation and our little mini debate here around how to apply things like NIST 863B, especially around passwords, checking out the White House memo on zero trust, what else, metaverse, and the dangers and potential therein, right? Those sorts of things. And anything else before we wrap it up?
We got the one audio podcast plug in. I think the second one is we're going to be releasing another episode on Monday, and it's titled "What is the A in CIAM?" I hope I didn't give away something you wanted to keep secret, but
Nope.
You came up with it. It's a fantastic title.
No, our guest came up with it. Really, I stole it from him. So it'll be episode 132. Comes out Monday, February 7th. It is the A in CIAM, Customer Identity and Access Management, and our guest on that episode will be Ward Duchamp. And he mentioned it as part of our conversation, so I have shamelessly taken it and made that the title of the episode. So there you go. There is a little bit of the fourth wall coming down for people on how we do things around here. All right. Well, I think with that, that's a good spot. We'll go ahead and leave it. Thanks for those who are watching live. Arturo is viewer of the day with his multiple comments and good points that he helped kind of bring the conversation along. For folks who are watching on the replay, feel free to comment below, and we'll happy to keep the conversation rolling through there, or maybe bring it up in one of our future podcasts or live streams like this. So with that, thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.